This is someone who's a former legislator, a college professor, has her own show, over 500,000 followers on Twitter. And a lot of the things that she says, if you're not actually going into the policies that she's actually advocating, it becomes really easy to say, well, that sounds good. Like this is this one cares about people. She's one of the good guys. Yeah. And this first tweet that we're going to talk about is actually a pretty good example of this. She said, capping insulin at $35 for seniors is a good first step. It's not the end goal as it's being celebrated as. Insulin should be free for everyone. She said this on January 2nd.
This was yesterday.
So here's my problem is, again, you look at something like this and you think, well, yeah, and insulin is, if you have diabetes, insulin is necessary for you to live. Well, so of course, someone should not be at a point where they're like, I either got to pay for groceries or I've got to die because I can't afford my insulin, right? And that is how this sort of thing is put forward, is this as if this is the very real choice that millions of Americans living with diabetes are faced with on a day-to-day basis. And the problem is that it isn't true. That isn't the choice that is faced by millions of Americans every day. It just isn't. Because as high as you might see some of these prices for insulin advertised or things like that, there is always a mechanism for people with indigent care that don't have there's always a mechanism for them to be able to get it. And secondly,
but Nick, how?
Well, wait a second. And secondly, it's this whole idea of like, it should be free for everyone. Well, gosh, that sounds nice if we lived in a magical world where products and services had no cost associated with their manufacture, distribution, or creation. But that isn't what's going on. And so you see something like this, and what it does is, again, my moral problem with what she's saying is that it creates this idea in people's minds that this should be free, that if some sort of injustice was not taking place, this would be free, and it's not. And therefore, right, Nina Turner is going to be the person that we trust. And if we just give people like Nina Turner power, well, then this stuff will be free, right? Who could be against that?
I want to dig briefly into the philosophy that's inherent behind this tweet, that kind of reading, between the lines.
Yeah.
And then I want to tee up an opportunity for you to kind of explain to the audience what is so nefarious with the approach that she's taking here, and really the general argumentation. So first off, notice how it's almost like it's implied where she set up this dichotomy where if you are opposing what I'm saying, that means you're pro insulin should be $5,000, right? She is implicitly setting up a debate where it's one side is the morally good side saying insulin should be free, and the other side are the evil, greedy big pharma. By the way, apparently Democrats now hate big pharma after spending 2 or 3 years just shilling for them over and over again. Now they've gone back to hating them. But notice how that's implicitly in there, right? Because if you disagree with her, therefore, it basically what she's trying to say is, if you disagree with me, that's you saying, no, insulin should be over $35 for everybody.
Yeah.
That's the argument that she's making. So that's the philosophical approach that she's taking to this, which is, quite frankly, I think a little bit disingenuous, implying that if you disagree with her, that means that you want people to pay more. No, it's government operates in trade-offs. And if you're going to do the necessary things to subsidize making insulin free, guess what happened? There's so many examples of this. When you do price caps, that's what this is, right? When you do price caps, you will either restrict the supply or you will increase the cost burden for everybody in the process. But you said that there's already mechanisms in place, so when you see that price point, that's not usually what people pay. Well, Nick, how do you respond to people? And this is the question I was going to ask. How do you respond to people that would say, maybe they're not, just completely drunk the Kool-Aid at this point, and they have at least somewhat of a stronger argument to make. And, what do you say to the left-wing person when you tweet about this that comes back and says, well, Nick, those mechanisms that are already in place, those are all government mechanisms. Thank you for proving my point, Nick.
Well, the interesting part is that, okay, so we have several government mechanisms and it's still not achieving what you want. At what point are you going to start to question the value of the government mechanism? Now, let's look at, because the very first response to the tweet, go back to the last tweet. very first response to the tweet is, without the FDA, insulin would have been offered as a biologic a decade ago. It would $2. It would be $2 right now. She's actually probably fairly close to what it would be. Because here's one of the problems, and the reason why so many people look at a tweet like this and are sympathetic toward it is because Nina Turner is actually addressing a genuine problem. And a problem that doesn't need to exist, right? The high cost of insulin. Should insulin cost as much as it do? Like, for instance, do we have to, like, I don't know, hunt unicorns to find insulin, right? No, right? There's actually a fairly simple process for getting insulin. The patent for insulin was actually, I think, sold for $1 in the 1920s. So this begs the question, right? The problem that Nina Turner has identified is a genuine one, and there does seem to be some injustice associated with it. What Nina Turner wants to chalk that up as is the same thing she wants to chalk. This is corporate greed. Okay, all right. I will concede to Nina Turner that the real problem here is corporate greed. But that doesn't answer the question. Why is it that something that, arguably hundreds, if not thousands of different, pharmaceutical manufacturers could create at an incredibly low price? Why is it that none of them are actually creating it at a lower price in the United States in order to undercut their market competition? Oh, it's because the FDA, a federal agency, grants them special monopoly privileges for two reasons. One, they have really good lobbyists, right? Some of the companies that are advocating. Two, the FDA has made the process for actually going through this increasingly expensive and difficult, which means a company that could probably do pretty well selling insulin at a very, very low rate cannot break into this marketplace because there is no way they can get through the barriers that the FDA has set up to go through the approval process.
There's been studies that have shown that on average, the average drug takes somewhere like 3+ years and like $2 to $3 billion to actually get approval and get to market.
And that started in, I think it was in the 1960s, because it used to be the FDA had a process where they used to have a process where your drug couldn't hurt somebody. Then they changed the process so your drug has to do everything that you're claiming that it can do. And the result is that, okay, you just added a bunch of tests
huge
on
hurdle.
with that.
And not only that, because people are somewhat different. And so you could be running a test and half the people it's not showing a benefit, and so therefore the FDA will hold production of it because of that. But under the previous rules before the 60s, that wouldn't have been the case, and that's driven up the price. Yeah. But to your point, and to wrap this segment up, I won't chalk it up to corporate greed, because the same motivations that exist for corporations operating within the medical field are the same motivations that exist in food. It's the same motivation that exists with technical equipment like laptops and phones. It's the motivation everywhere. It's the motivation that I'm going to put in work and I'm going to get a reward for it. I'm going to get monetary compensation for it. You're not a charity. You go bankrupt if you end up giving away computers for free. Yeah. And so therefore, you need to make a profit selling it. That's not evil. Things would not exist in this world if you
I
didn't.
agree. And keep in mind, when I'm saying corporate greed, I'm not talking about corporate greed associated with providing a product or a service for a price. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about the sort of corporate greed that Nina Turner doesn't want to talk about. That's the corporate greed where a corporation goes to the government in order to achieve regulatory capture or subsidies in order to finance their operations at the expense of their competition. And if Nina Turner was serious, if she was serious about this, then what she would be doing is saying, why has the federal government intervened in such a way as to prevent other companies from being able to go out and provide this good, which people desperately need for their survival, at a rate that they can afford? But no, she doesn't want to answer that question. She just wants to throw it out there that if Nina Turner had her way, it would be free. Well, how does Nina Turner plan to make it free? She doesn't, because there's no possible way to do that. What she plans to do is have the government intervene to such a degree as to either engage in price caps, which, again, if you engage in price fixing, you will either create jizz or you will have increased costs spread out to people that aren't using the product, right? Or she wants a government takeover of this, and we all know what a great job government institutions do at efficiently and effectively providing goods and services to people, right? They don't. Right. So the problem is that what Nina Turner is not actually revealing to people is that the problem that she's identified is genuine, but she's misdiagnosed the root of the problem. It's not just a bunch of corporations sitting around going, hey, let's be super greedy and get rich. Because the bottom line is that if other companies were able to compete for this, then what you would find is a lot of companies that could sell insulin at a price that is highly affordable and competitive within the marketplace, and it would cause a lot of these other companies to have to actually reduce their prices as well. But it's the very government that Nina Turner wants to give more power to that has created a monopoly within this industry. And so, yes, Nina, you've identified a problem. And your solution is more government intervention in the form of price caps or government takeovers, everything else. And what we have seen demonstrated time and time again over space and time, right? Other countries have attempted to do this, is that you end up creating more problems than you actually solve. So just be honest. The problem was the government intervened in such a way as to create monopolies. And if we just got rid of the monopolies and we allowed more people to be able to produce this, you would actually get a better quality, you'd get more quantities, and you would get it at prices that people could afford. How do we know that? Because it's pretty much true of everything else within the marketplace. Now, I'm going to get to one other argument that I have to, and that is Nick, this is different. This isn't a coffee mug or a laptop or an iPhone. This is something that is desperate for people to actually survive. Yeah, Nina, you're right. And that makes it even more important that you don't hand it over to a government bureaucracy, that you don't have politicians having the final say on who gets what. Because we see this in other countries right now, don't we, Nina? We see this in the sort of centrally planned economies that you want to emulate, where now the government has the power to say, oh, no, you didn't do what we want. You don't get your insulin. Right? Is that really what you want? No, but see, in a marketplace, you can always get it because there's always somebody that wants you to have it. They want you to get the product. And in the marketplace, the difference too is that we recognize that every single good or service, every single one has a cost associated with it. For instance, Nina Turner has served as a college professor. Really, did she provide that education for free or did she demand compensation for that? Nina Turner was a state legislature. Really, did she do it for free or did she get provided compensation for it? She runs around saying that, workers need to fight for more wages. Well, how are we supposed to get things free if people are demanding that they get paid for something? So stop being intellectually dishonest in such a way to where you're negating every other argument that you're making with respect to labor and everything else. Because I got news for Nina, right? Laborers show up and they want to get the most amount for their labor for the least amount of expense to them. And it's the same thing businesses want. They want the most profit that they can get for the least amount of energy done to make the good or service. So instead of creating monopolies where all of a sudden we allow perverse incentives to create a situation where things become unaffordable, you allow an open marketplace where now all of a sudden the incentives associated between buyers and consumers are now working in conjunction with one another to get the best quality, the best access at the best price.